Our final reading from today comes from Psalm 62 and Mark chapter 13. Here are the words of the psalmist. For God alone my soul waits in silence. From God comes my hope and salvation. God alone is my rock and my salvation. My fortress, I shall never be shaken. Trust in God at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. For God alone my soul waits in silence. From God comes my hope and salvation. Here are Jesus' words from Mark chapter 13. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know the time when it will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves his home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, whether the master will come in the evening or at midnight, or at the cockcrow at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. The word of God for the people of God. When I was a kid, I hated waiting. When I was 4 years old, I got so tired of waiting at the massive lines at Disneyland that I decided to duck under all of the lane dividers and run past huge crowds straight to the very front of the ride. Now you can imagine the panic and fear that my mom felt as she tried to cross all those lane dividers in front of hundreds of people just trying to chase me down at Disneyland. Then there was the time that was right here at First Presbyterian Church when I was growing up. Jim Brown was preaching in the main sanctuary here today. And like today, the children's sermon always came early on in the service. When I was probably 3 or 4 years old, all of the families of the church all sat in the very back of the sanctuary so as not to disturb the rest of the congregation. I guess I got tired of waiting for the children's sermon, and I also wanted to get a beat on the other kids. So before you know it, during the call to worship, I went army crawling under all of the pews, ducking through people's legs and heading straight to the front of the sanctuary. It wasn't long until I popped up right in front of the pulpit, surprising Jim Brown and causing total embarrassment to my mom and dad. See, when you're a kid, waiting can be downright agonizing. Any parents know this is true. As you look forward with hope and anticipation of what is to come. Ask any kid right now if they want Christmas to be tomorrow, and they'll say yes. Of course, the challenges of waiting don't stop as we get older. Matter of fact, recent studies show that a person who lives to be 80 years old has spent over 5 years of their lives waiting in line, 6 months waiting in traffic, and 13 hours a year waiting on hold. We also spend another 6.7 years waiting for food and for children and partners to arrive. What's even more amazing is that in our modern world, we now spend months of our lives literally just waiting for websites, movies, tickets, and technology to load on our screens. Given that waiting has become such a central piece of our lives, what spiritual lessons must we learn from all this waiting? And why has the church dedicated a whole season in Advent to this idea of waiting? I thought a lot about this, and also a lot about the words of the Psalms that we heard from this morning, as I reflected on great periods of waiting in my own life. Perhaps the greatest moment of waiting that I have experienced occurred when we were waiting for the birth of my daughter, Brooke, to be born. The year was 2020, and the entire world was thrust into a place of fear and uncertainty as the pandemic raged on. Jen was 5 months pregnant when the pandemic hit, and we had just learned that there were going to be major complications with this birth. I still remember the fear and the anxiety and the uncertainty I felt as we sat waiting for the doctor to bring in the test results. The doctor spoke for more than 5 minutes in complex medical terms. This forced me to ask, What does even all this mean in terms of practical reality? I said to the doctor. The doctor looked at me and said, "You're not having the baby here in Santa Fe. You need to go up to Denver to Colorado Children's Hospital." It was a devastating moment. A moment that only led to more waiting and more wondering if Jen would be okay and if Brooke would be okay. This waiting only intensified as the pandemic made it incredibly difficult to find housing in a whole new city in Denver, hundreds of miles away from the comfort of home. With the hospitals, medical facilities, and the whole world on full lockdown, we were forced to journey into a vast place of uncertainty and more anxious waiting. On a soul level, I began to resonate with how Mary and Joseph must have felt as a young pregnant couple, forced to leave their home to meet the demands of the Roman census. Surrounded by an unstable and uncertain world, they traveled literally miles on foot to the city of Bethlehem, where they desperately try to figure out how they were going to survive and even where they could take shelter while waiting for this new baby to arrive. You can imagine the fear, the uncertainty, and the vulnerability these young parents felt as they traveled along dangerous roads going from inn to inn, just looking for a place for Mary to give birth. You can tell how difficult this journey was and how anxious the waiting for this couple truly was by how grateful Mary and Joseph were to simply be given a barn to give birth in. Think about that. As we waited for Jen's due date, the waiting and uncertainty took its toll on me. I worried constantly if Jen was going to be okay, if our new baby was going to be okay, and quite frankly, if the world was going to be okay as the pandemic raged on. Knowing Brooke would have to have life-saving abdominal surgery the day after she was born, the storm clouds of anxiety, fear, doubt, and expectation were swirling all around me. I needed perspective. I called my spiritual director and I explained the hurricane of emotions that I was feeling. He said, "Andrew, you must remember that even in the biggest storms, there's always an eye to the storm, a place of stillness in the middle, a place where you can slow down, center, see more clearly, and prayerfully reflect. You must find the eye of the storm that you are in," he said to me. As I ventured toward the eye of the storm, I reflected on all the emotions that had come simply from waiting: fear, nervousness, anticipation, hope, anxiety, boredom, irritation, and anger. But most of all, the emotion that I felt the strongest, and frankly the one I hated the most, was the feeling of helplessness. You know, that complex feeling that comes in the face of struggle, suffering, and worry that there's simply nothing you can do anything about but wait. It's a truly powerless feeling. It's a feeling that we rarely ever even talk about, much less name, as it contains a complex mixture of fear, vulnerability, and loneliness that can be humbling, scary, and frustrating. Any of us who have waited for a diagnosis, held the hand of a dying loved one, or watched a loved one suffer know just how gut-wrenching this feeling truly is. As I reflected on this feeling, I turned to Scripture, and I realized that all the feelings I was experiencing while waiting were not new to God's people. Matter of fact, the people of Israel knew all too well the feelings that come from a long and deep history of waiting. Desperately waiting to be freed from the slavery of Egypt. Anxiously waiting only to wander the desert for 40 more years looking for the promised land. With eagerness waiting to anoint a king. With agony waiting for the prophet's call for justice to be heeded. With helplessness waiting in the Babylonian exile. And ultimately with hope and expectation waiting for the Messiah. Indeed, many of the Psalms arose out of such periods of great waiting. Just listen to the words of Psalm 62 and Psalm 23 again. For God alone my soul waits in silence. From God comes my hope and salvation. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. The thing that I love about the Psalms is that their words come from a place of raw vulnerability, a place that prayerfully names the deepest emotions we feel, a place where fear and anxiety coexist alongside hope and expectation, and ultimately a place where we must acknowledge our own helplessness, that there's nowhere else to go, nothing else to do, and even our own strength is not enough, for we must turn to and rely on the living God who is the source of our hope and salvation. So much of Jesus' spirituality, so much of Jesus' identity as a human being is rooted in the Psalms. He knew all too well this place of deep waiting. Indeed, as we journey in our life together, Advent recognizes that waiting is at the heart of the biblical story, and it's at the heart of our human experience. Advent is indeed a strange and countercultural season, for we live in a world where waiting often feels like inconvenience, constant irritation, and even failure. Everything around us teaches us to speed up and hurry up. Fast food, instant answers, next day delivery. But Jesus teaches us that waiting is a spiritual discipline. Waiting is not what we do until something better happens. Waiting is the place where God is shaping us for what is to come and where much of our lives are lived. Today's gospel reading, Jesus speaks of what we are to do while we are waiting by offering a parable about servants who each have a task when the homeowner goes away. As the homeowner departs on a journey of unknown length and destination, Jesus warns the servants who are now in charge to stay vigilant, to stay awake. Jesus is clear that this is not to be a passive waiting, but an expectant waiting that is alert, purposeful, and hopeful. Jesus' teaching comes during the very final days of his life as he seeks to offer a message to us, disciples, who will remain after his death. Jesus knows that his followers are going to live through long seasons of waiting and uncertainty. Waiting after his death, waiting for his resurrection, waiting for his ascension, and the long stretch of time before he returns. So Jesus seeks to prepare his disciples for how to wait. Jesus knows that waiting must become a training ground for faith, hope, and love. A way to remind us that God is at work even when the world feels and looks so unfinished, my sisters and brothers. It is in Advent, the season that we are in, that the church recognizes what the world so readily denies, that most of our life are lived in this in-between space, a space between promise on the one hand and fulfillment on the other. The space of deep humanity where we experience feelings of vulnerability and helplessness, forcing us to see that we're not in control. A space of frustration and impatience as the world feels so painfully slow to change. And when truth, justice, healing, and reconciliation feel delayed and denied. A space of waiting that also lends to hope, endurance, resilience, and expectation that something is sacred is drawing near, even when we can't see it. Christianity, my sisters and brothers, does not ask us to suppress these complex emotions. Advent actually invites us to name them, to hold them before God in prayer, to let them be transformed into hope and a deeper relationship with God and with others. By having a whole season dedicated to Advent, Christianity gives spiritual language and rituals and community support to something every one of us as human beings experiences: longing, delay, and hope that is yet to see its completion. This season of waiting teaches us dependence on God, and that the world is not held together by our efficiency, our power, or our intelligence, but the world is held together by God's grace, by God's love, and by God's faithfulness to us. Indeed, for God alone, my soul waits in silence. From God comes my hope and salvation. Christianity dedicates this season to waiting, even in the most anxious of times, so that faith can grow, hope can take root, and we can learn to recognize God's presence in a world that is still and constantly unfolding. Today, I want to close my sermon with a story. It's a story about a 27-year-old young minister named Martin Luther King Jr., who had just launched the Montgomery bus boycott. Late one night as King was sleeping in his house, he was awakened by a phone call from an angry white voice that threatened to kill him and blow up his house. Unable to sleep, King sat scared, waiting in his kitchen in silence. Recalling his fear, King said this, and I quote, "I tried to lean on the theology and philosophy that I studied in university, trying to give philosophical reasons for the existence and reality of sin and evil, but the answer did not quite come there. Recognizing that my wife and daughter could be taken and killed at any moment, something said to me, you cannot call on daddy now, he's up in Atlanta. You can't even call on your mama. You've got to call on that person that your daddy used to tell you about. That power that can make a way out of no way. And I discovered then that religion had to become real to me, and I had to know God for myself. So I bowed down over my cup of coffee, and I prayed a prayer out loud that night, and I said, Lord, I'm down here trying to do what's right. I think I'm right. I think that the cause that we represent is right. But Lord, I must confess, I am weak now. I'm faltering. I'm losing my courage. And it seemed to me in that moment that I could hear an inner voice saying to me, Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth. And lo, I will be with you even until the end of the world. I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roll. I heard the voice of Jesus saying, still fight on. He promised never to leave me alone. No, never alone. No, never alone. In the silence of waiting, King met the risen Christ, who became the source of inner strength for the rest of his life. Indeed, sisters and brothers, we can move through our lives half asleep, going through routines, reacting to crisis, scrolling endlessly, and forgetting that God is quietly at work in every nook and cranny in this world. Advent shakes us gently on the shoulder and says, wake up. God is near, right here, right now, in this place with you. So then, my friends, I leave you with a simple question. What are you waiting for?